In my opinion, the worst type of porn addict is not the person who watches porn every single day. It's actually the person who's convinced themselves that they don't even have a problem to begin with. I call these people disciplined users. Now, by the end of this video, you'll understand why these allegedly disciplined users are actually some of the most undisciplined users to begin with, and the only thing worse than envying a disciplined user is being one yourself. If we haven't met, by the way, my name's Tolu. I was a former addict who's now free. I have no app blockers on my phone. Hotel rooms don't scare me. And it's because I've avoided the trap of being a disciplined user. So let's begin. People who tend to watch porn heavily on a regular frequency tend to envy people that watch porn casually because in their mind, they think that decreased frequency is a measure of control. And typically the emotion that drives this belief is fundamentally envy, right? Because the heavy user has this belief that the casual, disciplined user is to straddle the best of both worlds. It's almost as if they get to walk the line where they get the pleasure of watching porn, but they don't have to deal with the daily shame spiral that comes with using it every day. They figured out a way to game the system and they have what we would call the holy grail of porn. It's almost as if you can get to the point where that's your experience, then porn doesn't really become a grievous moral sin anymore because you're in control and you can stop anytime you want. So what happens is the goalpost shifts, and the goal isn't necessarily to quit anymore. The goal is just to get your porn addiction under control, because basically the belief is that reduced usage then means reduced consequences. So fundamentally, then there's less shame, there's less hatred, but most importantly, there's the freedom to still have this thing without feeling like it owns you. And the analogy I like to think about is the difference between being an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic, right? Because the alcoholic doesn't know how to stop, but the non-alcoholic can have a drink, 2 drinks, and they feel fine. So it's like one guy has a problem and the other one just has a preference. So after repeated attempts of trying to quit porn, the heavy user starts to ask themselves, I wonder what it would take to just get this under control so that I can just become like the other guy, the person who just uses it casually on an inconsistently consistent basis. And here's the problem though. This alleged disciplined user doesn't exist because they're not a disciplined user. They're what I would call a circumstantial user. What this means is the reason they use porn less than you isn't because they have more discipline than you. It's actually simply just because their circumstances are different than yours. Sometimes you might even hear the disciplined user refer to themselves as a casual user. It's all the same crap, do not be deceived. In fact, from here on out, eliminate that term disciplined or casual user from your vocabulary and replace it with circumstantial user. Now, this begs the question, what are some of the circumstances that make somebody use porn less frequently than you do? Well, time, for one. Think about it for a second, right? The circumstantial user may simply just have less time than you because they have different priorities or a different schedule than you, right? There are just things that take up more of their time than yours, and they've had to rearrange their addiction around their priorities. So maybe they have new employment that's simply just busier. Maybe they have children. Maybe they've gotten married. Things happen that simply just shift the dynamics of time, and somebody might try to categorize that as a win for why they reduce their usage of porn, but that's not really the truth. They simply just have less time. I guarantee you, if that individual had more time, their consumption of pornography would increase. Now, sometimes if it's not time, the other thing that's circumstantial is just friction, right? Sometimes the user gets caught. I should know. I've been caught watching porn 4 times in my life, and that's a video for another day. But the point is, when you get caught, you typically have to introduce some type of friction to prevent you from watching porn. So maybe you have accountability partners, maybe you have app blockers, maybe you have an open door policy, right? Maybe you have to confess to somebody every single day, look your spouse in the face and say, I didn't watch porn, knowing damn well that you did. But the point is that when you have to introduce friction, you also have to rearrange your porn consumption around the different mechanisms of friction that you've introduced. So what happened is that the individual didn't get free, they just got managed, and managed doesn't equate to free despite what they want you to believe. Allow me to make this incredibly clear for you. Nobody in their right mind chooses to be a circumstantial user. It is just a byproduct of being ungoverned, which is why the circumstantial user still feels like an addict after relapsing. They still deal with the same negative self-talk, guilt, shame spiral, and everything. Because if they chose to do it, then why would you feel that way, right? So the only difference is that the circumstantial user has to lie to themselves to justify their stupid behavior, and somehow they convinced you that their foolishness is admirable. If it sounds like I have a bone to pick with the circumstantial user, honestly, I do, because I see myself. In fact, I don't see myself. I was the circumstantial user. I can spot them from a mile away, and I can smell the BS on the center of their breath. As a principle, reduced usage doesn't change the nature of your porn addiction. It just changes your ability to see it for what it is. However, it is important that I explain what a circumstantial user is, because the circumstantial user isn't just someone that has a decreased frequency. The circumstantial user isn't just that person that's watching porn less than you. They show up in several different ways you might not recognize, and some of them might even surprise you. So there are 5 versions of the circumstantial user, and the first one is Mr. I just watch for the thrill. Now, this is the person who watches porn but doesn't always actually masturbate while they're watching porn. And this person thinks that they have restraint because they're choosing to control their behavior in some small way. So they convince themselves and they convince others that they technically didn't watch porn, because to them watching porn is defined as a pants around the ankle session. I'm sorry for being vulgar, but your boy just has to keep it real sometimes. Now, the irony of Mr. I just watch for the thrill is that you are still controlled by your cravings. You just don't want to admit that you're not in control, so you're choosing something that makes you feel like you're in control, because not finishing feels like a measure of control to you. You're still addicted, you just don't want to admit it. Now, the second type of user is not necessarily relapsing because of cravings, they're relapsing because of their triggers. Triggers can occur several different ways, but categorically there's really 4: failure, vulnerability, emotional intimacy, and rejection. Let's take failure, for example, because that is broad, right? There could be failure in love, failure in entrepreneurial pursuits, there could be failure in your athletic endeavors. This person watches porn whenever they feel the weight of their failure. The reason why they watch porn is because their failure then triggers this voice in their head that makes them struggle with the weight of their inadequacy. So they're still addicted, but in their case, their addiction is because they need porn in order to cope with the weight of their inadequacy. Again, it's still addiction. They just don't want to admit that the addiction is circumstantial based off of one of those 4 aforementioned triggers. Now, the third circumstantial user is Mr. Clear the Pipes. This is the person who schedules their porn usage around a dedicated time period. They use that as the opportunity to quote unquote clear the pipes. So what they believe is that because they're using porn intentionally around these dedicated time periods, then they have restraint. Really? Right. Have you ever seen what happens to those users when they're not able to use porn around that dedicated scheduled time? It literally drives them out of control. They go into fits of rage. They start rejecting intimacy with their spouse. They turn down social invitations because this was their time to clear the pipes, and they are petrified of what happens if they have to go into the next week with the pipes still backed up. Now, the fourth user is what I would call the categorically circumstantial user, or quote unquote the I only watch homemade user. This is the person who defines their control by the category that they watch, because they believe that they haven't progressed into deeper, more disturbing categories of pornography. Therefore, the restraint is proof of the fact that they only watch quote unquote homemade amateur videos, and that makes them feel like for some reason they're better than everyone else. But here's the thing: what do you think happens to this person when they can't find what they're looking for in that category? Do you honestly think that they just close the tab and walk away? Of course not. They just push the boundary of what they're looking for deeper. So this person, their boundary is a preference, but they like to mask their boundary as proof of restraint, when we all know the truth, it's really just your preference. Now, the fifth type of circumstantial user is actually relatively newer, and it tends to affect women more than it does men. I call this the ethically woke circumstantial user. This is the woman who understands that porn is inherently degrading towards women, but to justify her usage, she subscribes to ethical porn sites because it respects women, and she considers her woke consciousness as proof of control when it's simply just another measure of foolishness. She can't opt out of her addiction because she's too proud to admit it, so instead she chooses to hide behind fake wokeness. Now, as you can see, all 5 of these circumstantial users wear a different costume, but underneath that costume is the same person who simply just can't stop when they want to. And they've built around an entire identity around why that's okay. It is their ability to lie that makes them the worst kind of porn user, because they will notoriously lie to themselves, but then they will also lie to others about the scope of their usage, because it gives them a measure of control to hide the nature of their addiction and make them feel a little bit better about themselves. What is there to envy about that? So what they do is they like to minimize the intensity of their addiction by constructing circumstances that make it okay for their addiction to be acceptable. And here's the thing, all of them have the same tell. And you want to know what that tell is? It's that they justify their usage, because think about it. You only need to justify behavior that's fundamentally unjustifiable to begin with. Hey guys, quick side note, by the way, I recognize a lot of this stuff might be new or even confusing to you. If you need help or just want to find community, we've got a community on School. It is the #1 community for believers who want to overcome porn. The link is in the bio. It is free. I hope to see you there. Let me know if you have any questions. Let's get back to the video. If there's one thing about the circumstantial user that they don't quite understand, is that their relapse experience is actually worse than the person who's using porn every single day, because the distance that the circumstantial user celebrates so much is actually working against them. What they don't understand is the longer the gap that they go without using, then the harder that the novelty of porn actually hits, and that's what actually makes the addiction get deeper and even harder to break. So they think that distance is protecting them from porn, when in reality distance is actually sharpening the addiction. So they tend to be the most vulnerable people in the room, even though they think that they're the most free. And the way I like to think about this like this: would you celebrate a cheating husband just because he cheated less this month? Think about it, right? You're not going to hand him a trophy just because he only cheated on his wife twice this month instead of 5 times, right? And how much more foolish would he look if he then started arguing that he should be celebrated because even though he cheated twice, he actually could have cheated 100 times? Really? So that's why I say that the most dangerous porn addict is not the one who watches every day, it's the one who's convinced themselves that they don't have a problem. Because the heavy user is losing and they know it, but the circumstantial user is getting beat down, and they've constructed an entire identity to avoid the painful truth. Victory isn't defined by being a circumstantial user, it's defined by being a non-user. So don't be deceived, and do not envy and do not listen to the lie of the circumstantial user, because it is entirely possible to walk away from porn and become a non-user and not feel deprived, not feel like you're missing out, and not feel like you should be jealous of people who are still using. That is why I created Beneath the Urge, and I cannot wait to get you to that experience. Hit like and hit follow to learn more. I'll see you in the next video.